Hello and welcome to this video on biosafety cabinets. These being the place where you work on dangerous microbes, cells, and conduct various experiments. As there are a range of levels of pathogens, cells, and danger, there is a corresponding degree of safety cabinet available. The level of biosafety cabinet will generally correspond to the level of laboratory it is conducted within. Biosafety cabinets are an enclosed space. They're always ventilated, and it's designed to keep the organisms that you're working with, especially during microbiology, away from you and kept confined. They do this by essentially being a big box with air drawn out of that box and away from you at all times. You do not want these microbes or worse to enter you. They can easily cause an infection, and if it's the other way around, you could contaminate experiments or diagnostic testing. This also prevents the pathogens from getting into the local environment, which could cause contamination of clothes, equipment, and more. The first of the biosafety cabinets is an A-Class 1. This is defined as a cabinet that is ventilated and is intended for personnel and environmental protection. They really don't offer much more than that. They don't avoid contamination, they don't really have much of the way of applications, and they do not use unrecirculated air. This means that they have basically the same efficacy as doing it in a fume hood. The only distinction between a fume hood and an A-Class 1 cabinet is the presence of a HEPA filter, and even then, some chemical fume hoods will have a HEPA filter at the exhaust outlet, so they really aren't much better. In this case, they may also be conducted directly to the outside world. These are often found in laboratories that are level 1, 2, or 3, primarily in the lower end given what they are, but they're there fundamentally to simply prevent the person working on it from getting exposed unintentionally to the pathogens. An A-Class 2 cabinet is somewhat better and provides considerably more protection. It is still a ventilated cabinet, as all of these will be, but they provide personnel, product, and environmental protection for the work being conducted in them. They also generally provide a sterile environment. This is especially useful if you're working on pharmaceutical products. The Class 2 are nearly always open-fronted, but have airflow pulled into them. This ensures that anything like a microbe that might get into the air, for example, droplets of water, will flow into the cabinet and away from the person working on it. This will again go through yet another HEPA filter, and that will then prevent any large things from escaping into the environment. This thereby protects not only the laboratory environment, but the outside world environment. Unfortunately, it's not just as simple as Class 1, 2, and 3. We've mentioned that there are different kinds of biosafety cabinets, and in the case of Class 2 biosafety cabinets, there are a variety of ranges, these being A1, A2, B1, B2, and C1. These all have their own particular quirks, but each of them has commonalities as well. One of these is that the ducts must be under negative pressure. The entire cabinet must have negative pressure inside of it. This will always pull air in and away from anyone working in it. This also means that the Class 2, like Class 1, are generally safe for working in anything that's acceptable in a biosafety level 1, 2, or 3 laboratory. This works more towards the higher end of these numbers, but depending on what research or work is being conducted, it may be appropriate to use in a level 1 or in a level 3. The Class 2 Type A1 cabinets have very specific requirements, and in this case, it's the airflow going into the cabinet. Air must be pulled into the cabinet at a rate of about 25 meters per minute. This is only through a narrow opening at the bottom. The rest of it is a movable screen that's made out of solid material. The air then goes through the cabinet and out through a HEPA filter and then back into the laboratory. This means that anything that's being picked up by that air is caught in the filter and prevented from getting back out and possibly infecting anyone working in there. These are good for some biological agents, but not if they are full of volatile products. For example, you don't want to be working on something that's going to turn into a gas, get out, and then get into your respiratory system and cause harm. Think, for example, of things like mixing ammonia and chlorine, which creates mustard gas. Or you may have other reagents that are used more regularly, such as, say, chloroform for DNA extraction. The Class 2 Type A2 cabinets need 30 meters per minute of air moving through, again, a sash opening, this being a small space at the bottom. They have the established requirements of a Type A1 biosafety cabinet, but they also need to have further requirements on top of this, hence their extra name. They need to be able to deal with small amounts of hazardous chemicals. Think of, again, things like, say, chloroform for DNA extraction. There should also be tiny amounts of, say, radionucleotides that should be able to get through there, but also not get out of the cabinet. This is where the difference between the two is. Type A1, no volatile toxic chemicals or things that could turn into that. Type A2 should deal with small amounts of this. Class 2 Type B1 cabinets take this further. They have the same 30 meters per minute of airflow through the opening, the same HEPA filters, but they have downflow air which should be uncontaminated, recirculated airflow, and most of this should then go through that system and be exhausted outside. These also should be able to deal with small amounts of toxic chemicals. The primary difference between B1 and A2 is that air is going to be filtered and exhausted outside, whereas A2 is entirely recirculated. Class 2 Type B2 cabinets have the same airflow requirements and general considerations as a Type B1. The difference is that no air whatsoever going through the cabinet should be recirculated. This means what goes in there does not return to the lab, and everything is exhausted into the outside world through a HEPA filter. These are suitable for use with chemicals that are dangerous and not just small amounts. That's because none of the air that would be contaminated with these would ever find its way back into the laboratory. Class 2 Type C1 are more of an interesting variation on these, primarily because they only have slightly higher airflow requirements, but otherwise are more or less the same as a Type A or Type B biosafety cabinet. This is done with a relatively simple system. You can switch a valve which allows air to be recirculated or not recirculated. If it's not being recirculated, it is discharged to the environment in the outside world through a filter, same as a Type B. If it is instead recirculated through the laboratory, it is like a Type A. Finally, we have Class 3 biosafety cabinets, and these are perhaps what you would think of when you think of depictions from Hollywood of biosafety cabinets. These are entirely enclosed boxes. They are ventilated and are intended to discharge air through filters into the outside environment. They should have no leaks in them, allowing air to get in or out or whatsoever. There are also rubber gloves built into it. This allows for operations that will never have any contact with the person working on it or the thing being worked on. These are also occasionally colloquially called glove boxes. The contents of this bio cabinet should be sterilized before they leave the box. It's also under the same constant negative pressure. Before the contents of the air ever gets into the outside world, it goes through filtration and incineration. These sorts of biosafety cabinets are incredibly expensive and tedious to work with. It's also why they are the only biosafety cabinets that are suitable for everything from biosafety level 1 to level 4 laboratories. Level 4 being where they work on the most dangerous of things imaginable. As you can see, these cabinets are a necessity for keeping laboratory workers and researchers safe. Without these, they could be infected by a pathogen or exposed to unintended organisms or reagents. Biosafety cabinets are a very technical construction. The reason for this is primarily regarding their filtration and movement of air. It also keeps the microbes secure and safe from the people working with them. This can be important when you're trying to, say, take a sample of a sputum, pus, some sort of wild collected microbe, and translate it into a pure culture. These sorts of cabinets can prevent contamination if good aseptic technique is followed. This is essential for both clinical diagnostics and research. Without these, the results from microbiology might not be reliable, and you might be getting random results and therefore the wrong antibiotics. You might be developing cultures of bacteria that are meant to be genetically modified but could be mixed with who knows what. Thank you for watching this video. If you have found it interesting, consider liking, sharing, and subscribing.